Okay. Oh, guess we'll get started. Um, Hi everyone, welcome to Learning Planet Festival 2023. My name is Coco Zhu. I am a high school junior from Miss Porter School in Connecticut, US, and I will be your main speaker in this workshop. Following today's theme, Planetizens Take the Stage. In this workshop, we continue the effort to encourage more youth individuals to take part in global changes and become the pioneers of their own creativities. With this goal, towards the end of this workshop, we will proudly announce the launch of the SHIELD initiative to celebrate and inspire more youth participation in the field of mental wellness. We have three major programming in this event. We will start with the masterclass discussing the importance of the problem and detailing on the initiative. This will be followed by a youth panel where we will be joined by two other youth speakers, Ange and Catherine, to discuss and discover synergies through art and mental health. In the final part, we will launch the SHIELD initiative and introduce our next key steps. About every 1 in 5 K6 to 12 students has experienced some sort of mental health disorder, including depression and anxiety. Have you ever realized how frequent the word burnout was verbalized on campus every single day? Yet the anxiety behind such vocab never really get diminished or treated, even with a huge amount of attention given to that word. Unfortunately, but inspiring, I once was and maybe is still one of the data points. Hi everyone, I'm Coco Zhu. And now I will introduce my story and what makes me come to the realization to use art as a path to healing anxieties among youth. During my sophomore summer, I was extremely burned out by the heavy amount of workload I chose to put on myself. Yet instead of taking a rest, I kept working. There was nothing else in my life except for the strong desire to keep working and pressing myself to finish everything on my calendar. Well, you might think, as I certainly did, Coco, is that a positive motivation? Yet what the mindset brings is the opposite. I shamed myself for taking even just half an hour to rest, sleep, scroll through my phone, or plan time for reading that I consider as a useless use of time. Till the end, as the anxiety piled up, I finally broke down. I realized the pressure had cost me a month and month of therapy and self-care afterwards to even truly recover from the anxious mindset. In long term, as I was reflecting back on that experience, I noticed an unconscious toxic lifestyle that made me stuck in a cycle of anxiety and being more and more reluctant to take healthy rest. The habit of measuring accomplishment by level of busyness is pervasive among students, especially in high school ages. And complaining about having burnout problems, but at the same time honoring anxiety as a sign of hardworking is almost a signature mindset for students like me and my peers. For youth, what we are practicing in school constitutes a big part of what we are going to use to and carry on to our future life. And if all we remember is, oh, I gotta work hard 13 hours every day to get over a heavy workload and resting is unnecessary and shameful, that's going to be our only smart technique to face stress in our future college, even careers. And for us, what the schools are doing currently is active but not sufficient to alleviate this problem of anxiety from its root. I believe a quality education not only prepares youth academically, but mentally with a strong and healthy mindset that supports us to thrive in the future. What the students need is not just a counseling office. Only when stress really piles up into serious anxiety disorder will we realize the problem and finally willingly report ourselves to the counseling office to get treated. Yet this type of large stage treatment is not going to solve or change the root of anxiety. That is the reluctance to self-care. And especially for teenagers as us, It is hard to initiate self-care if we don't know it's the right thing to do or even what it is. I came to realize that what we need as a youth is not counseling nor a treatment, but simply a lifestyle that teach us to invest time and value in healthy resting. We need to educate students and us the importance and necessity of putting this type of practice as a part of our schedule. And that's when I found out about art therapy as a way to heal. As one of those very typical Chinese kids, my parents brought me to an art studio very early in my childhood. Art has been around me for more than 10 years. And I find it surprising that even when I grew up, changed the city of study, travel abroad, or when facing a busy schedule, my habit of going to the art studio in my high school just never changes. And soon I found out that it is because the sense of peacefulness and simply self-expression that made painting a priceless routine for me. So that's where I get started. We started an art club in our school where we give the whole community, not just the art students, an opportunity to get in touch with art and use the art studio every weekend. Our school also held activities called Bowl-a-thon every month where anyone can go into the ceramic studio and play with clay. From those activities, I slowly observed how much putting an hour every weekend for art can bring me and my peers off both taking rest and having self-growth. And this is what inspired me that maybe investing in art could be the approach that substantiates changes. In fact, research shows that using therapeutic art can be an effective path to relieve anxieties and panic attacks as it facilitates self-expression and self-awareness and enforces a sense of calmness inside the individuals. Benefiting from the environment of my own school and through my own experience, I soon realized the opportunity to heal through art is not accessible on every high school campus. In reality, in most high schools, practicing art is seen as only necessary and accessible for art majoring students, while the rest of the community doesn't get in touch nor use art as a practice of relaxation, even when almost every campus has an accessible art studio. As I am inspired by the idea of bringing art therapy to more campuses, I took a deeper look into outside art therapy providers and was searching for possibilities for collaborations. A talk with the NGO Art and Soul Therapy made me realize the current challenges also faced by the organizations and the youth. To start, most art therapy organizations are generally distanced from the students' demographics, as paid therapy are mostly done among adults. Furthermore, the huge demand on mental health service are largely unmet by the small number of art therapists, especially as the statistics of mental health skyrocketed after COVID. Thus, only a small portion of more privileged or patients with strong demand can get treated, therefore excluding the general student population who may even lack the awareness of getting mental health treatment. And more importantly, even when group-based anxiety-related art therapies can be extremely beneficial to help out most individuals in the public, it is rarely carried out as a result of lack of government funding and insurance policies. And here is where the idea of the Shield Initiative comes into place. We are here so that there is a bridge between art therapy providing NGOs and youth who need the service. We focus on applying statistics, research methodologies, and youth initiative to further mental well-being among teens. Shield is a community that makes general professional group-based art therapy accessible, simple, and shame-free to students right on their campus. From Brain Services, Shield brings and builds a network of different school communities that share the same goal and bring the power of art onto every campus. And this way, we truly reintroduce the concept of art as more than being aesthetic, but actually a powerful tool to heal. With this goal, the SHOT initiative focused on debriefing SDG 3, 4, and 17. That is good health and well-being, quality education, and partnerships for the goals. We believe that a truly qualified education is when schools no longer only prepare our youth academically, but help us to build up a healthy and powerful mindset that prepares students for our future. This includes encouraging active awareness of mental well-being. To achieve and constitute long-lasting impacts, we introduced the Canopy framework to help us manage and measure our initiative. Canopy stands for compassion, art, network, orientation, perseverance, and youth. The first one is compassion. Compassion for our peers and the environment surrounding us inspire us to make changes together. And with the right compassion, art is the next step. In our therapy, we can always find a way to express ourselves, our status, and our identities. Art helps us heal, rest, and prepare us for a better world. And network. The right network with passionate NGOs, youth, and schools connects us together. And together as a whole net, we can bring the best resources to the most needed on campus and into our youth's daily life. Orientation. Data analysis orients the issue. We apply statistics concepts to help us better understand the problem, plan our actions, and measure our impacts. Perseverance. Only perseverance makes impactful changes. We continue our efforts to impact and empower more individuals and continue to raise a wider and deeper awareness of what we are advocating for. And finally, the youth. Youth is not just who we support, but also who we are. We help youth by bringing art therapy to schools. We also involve youth, inspire them, and continue the cycle of changes within our own generation. Since our inception of the SHOT initiative in 2022, it has taken steps to meet its mission in Canopy building. We propose over 25 project ideas for a better build art therapy model. We engage with 15 plus Better Together youth. And for a professional art therapy environment, we are in contact with 3 NGOs. And lastly, there are 2 events in the operation for the SHOT therapy. With enough information being said, we are now onto the youth panel track. In this panel, we will be joined by 2 youth leaders, Ange Stott and Catherine Chung, to discuss more on youth power in shaping a changing world in mental health. Ange and Catherine, do you want to turn on your camera so we can start the youth panel? Hello, hello. Ange is a student from New Zealand. She is the founder of Equality Design, an international organization that advocates for people of color. And Catherine is a sophomore from the Cho School in the US. She founded the Ascend framework, which leads system to change align with her life goals of artistic activism. So hi, Ange and Catherine. Would you 2 like to unmute yourself and introduce a bit more about your stories and projects? Ange can start, I guess.
Sure. Hi guys, I'm Ansh, and as Coco said, I'm a 16-year-old student in New Zealand, and I'm the founder of Equality Design. A little bit about myself. I'm on the school's board of trustees as student representative, and as part of that, I bring a unique perspective on the arts. I bring a bit of a different perspective on arts as a whole to Coco because I come from more of a musical artsy background than visual arts. I've been singing for 8 years, and I recently completed my grade 7 Trinity College exams with distinction this last year for singing. I'm a member of the National Academy Choir in New Zealand, and a nationally ranked choir at my school. I sing in a couple of school bands, and I've had the opportunity to participate in various regional competitions for singing and won like awards for those. I do quite a bit of community theatre. In 2021, I musically directed my first youth show with kids aging 10 to 14. And this year, I musically directed Newsies Junior with a cast ranging from ages 10 to 18. Closing night was actually last night. So post-show depression is real, but yeah, it was a really awesome experience. I'm very much a humanities enthusiast, and I endeavoured to study most rigorous course available geared towards the English, economics, history, and the arts at my school. And I do quite a bit of like independent study in my free time about topics like regarding philosophy, political science, macroeconomics, and poetry. So that's a little bit about myself, kind of on a general scale. But yeah, that's me.
Thank you. Catherine?
Yeah. Hi guys. My name is Catherine. I am a sophomore at the Cho School, like Coco mentioned. But I am originally from Shanghai, China. I'm also 16 this year. And the reason why I wanted to come on this panel and speak today is because a lot of the visions and things that Shield advocates for is stuff that I'm interested personally. So in my school, I'm part of a program called Arts Concentration, where I get to spend around 10 hours each week in the studio just making things and experimenting things. And for me, the end goal of the accumulation of that time is to be able to create a lot of mixed media and installation works that kind of interacts with the audience and is used as a way of the audience to piece together ideas on their own in order to kind of like advocate for a certain perspective. For instance, my most recent work that I've completed focuses on how everyone has their own biases, whether it's based on where they're from or how they grew up, and trying to visualize these biases with glasses, kind of like sculptural work, and using like different color techniques so that when you look through different glasses, there's certain messages you can see that are pasted on the wall. And I included some text from different textbooks regarding historical events and how different textbooks in different countries tell a different story and narrative of what happened. So more art activism kind of things. But I'm definitely also interested in the field of mental health. I feel like there's been a lot of people around me, including myself, that feels this is a very relevant problem for people our age today. And I definitely do see potential for the arts as something that engages with people's more emotional responses to the world as something that can help us heal and come together as a community. So thank you, Coco, for this opportunity.
All right, thank you. So thank you. With this being said, we will go through some topics on artistic expression and mental health to further our opinion in this field. So as we are going through those discussion, just feel free to mention any of your other experience or any of your project to support your opinion, I guess. The first one is for art in general. Regarding your experience with art, what does art bring you other than as a skill set? I know Ansh does a lot of poetry and music, and Catherine does painting as art activism.
Yeah, art for me, I think it's one of the most effective ways to communicate the concept of humanity and feelings and emotions. And I think that's through all aspects of art, especially, through like painting and poetry and things like that. And I think it's like proof that every brain is worth picking and every mind, like everyone has something of value to bring to the table. And I think that's expressed really well through art. And I have a little story. I was talking to one of my choir buddies who I'd never spoken to before about music. And we were joking around about how she was telling me about how she poured her heart into her composition for a music class and what she might do if she became famous, as a joke. And we ended up talking for hours. And by the end of the conversation, I typed into my notes app a very unedited and raw idea. And it's not really a poem, but it's more just kind of just a big chunk of text. And so I'll read it to you, and then I'll tell you kind of what I took away from that story. So there are special artists who scribble their messy dots and sticks onto paper to document their emotions. They shout, "This is how I feel," at the world to voice their stories. Maybe no one will hear them, but at least there's comfort in knowing there's proof somewhere in the world on a hidden, dusty shelf in a record shop or tucked away in an anonymous playlist on Spotify that we had the capacity to feel. And I take away two things from the story. Firstly, art brings people together. The friend who I referenced earlier is one of my best friends now. And of course, that art is proof that we can feel deeply in a world that encourages youth to do the opposite, which I think is something we can touch on, especially with mental health awareness and kind of providing opportunities for young people. And that it's proof that we are capable of healing and magic. And a really interesting quote, I think, is art is not a mirror with which to reflect reality, but a hammer with which to shape it. So I think that's another way for that's another way to bring in the concept of art sharing humanity and feeling. And I think, yeah, it's quite reflective. It kind of ties it together. Yeah, that's my kind of take on art.
Thank you. I know it definitely comes a lot across when you mentioned art activism in terms of like when I was talking to Catherine a few days ago, we have some idea of like how art can be used both as a way to express yourself so that other people can see you and as a way to internalize it and to kind of like seek support. So Catherine, do you want to talk more about your opinion on this thing?
Well, yes, definitely. And I would say I want to talk about this through a couple of metaphors and analogies. And the first one is I think art is very much like a Trojan horse. I was debating this throughout like my whole like journey as an artist, and it's like if I really wanted to change the world, why don't I just make an infographic, like a Canva poster, where everything, all the information straight in front of you, explicit, communicated very clearly to the viewer? Why go through the phases of creating art and trying to create something that maybe people would interpret in a different way, what will now grasp completely, right? And I think there's some intrinsic value in art where when you look at a piece of work and the viewer goes through a journey of piecing together the elements, digesting the physical appearance of it, or sometimes you listen to the sound, you touch it, the feel, kind of absorbing information about the piece of work from all aspects and taking these pieces of the puzzle and piecing it together into like something you make sense of, or a feeling or a reaction that you have. And that process of finding it yourself and reaching to that end feeling of like epiphany or awe or whatever it is that something elicits in you, that's going to be a more impactful experience that's going to become a core part of yourself because there's a personal connection there. It's not someone who just whips up a bunch of facts in front of you and tell you to think a certain way. You've experienced it yourself. It's part of like your memory and who you are. And I feel like that's why a lot of times art is able to touch us more than you know, the argumentative essays or like the expression of words. And I think the second part is I would say art is very much like a asymptote, like a for me, and I'm sorry, I'm referencing a little bit of math here, but when we have an asymptote in like a logarithm function or something, we can get infinitely close to zero, but the line will never cross zero. And I think that's the same as people, it's hard for someone to really know what I experience as a person or what anyone experiences if you're not that person, because you guys are different people at the end of the day. But if you can use art to communicate yourself and kind of relate these feelings you have to the world, you can get infinitely close. And by that point, it doesn't matter if you're not the same person. There's a commonality there. There's an expanding circle of empathy that you can achieve using art that you couldn't with a lot of other things. And I think the third point is it's just it has different limitations than I would think other forms of expression such as language. I feel like definitely what Ansh mentioned, like poetry and writing and visual arts, they are different yet similar. And I feel like one of the things that's amazing is for visual arts, a lot of the times our thoughts are limited by our vocabulary of what we can say in the English dictionary. You could have only so many terms in the Webster dictionary to communicate. And you're even like this is done in a lot of psychology studies, your thoughts are limited by the words you can think of. If you don't have a word to communicate this thought, then you wouldn't really necessarily think of it in the first place. That's why when people want to destroy ideology, they start first with erasing the language of it. But what if I think visual art can bring out some nuances of human experience that we don't have the words to describe, and sometimes it entails a wider range of emotions and experiences, especially for someone who is going through mental health problems, or feels like they don't have the words to vocalize, or they don't have the voice to tell their people how they are doing and what they are going through. So those are my three different metaphors. I hope they were helpful to understand.
Thank you so much. This actually reminds me of two things. The first one I think is the book called 1984, by what's the name? George Orwell. So they talk about how like, to enforce an ideology, you have to erase the words so that even if you can feel something, because you can't express it with anything. I think they also like ban art. You can't like express it. That's how your feelings are invalidated, through a sense.
Yeah, that was definitely the book I was referencing when I said that. So it's nice to
Exactly.
have that connection.
I think the second thing is when I was like scrolling through my phone for the past few days, I came across a line that was, for art, it's when you're seeing an art pieces, it's not a chance for you to understand the artist that much, but for a chance that like a very successful art is for you to look at it and then you know yourself better. So I think that's a very interesting thing about like how artists, the emotion is very tangible in art, and sometimes I view it as more than a skill set for me, because I feel like sometimes people, especially like students, they think too much of art as something you need to be good at to be able to use it. But just as like how art can be so many different things, you can use it in so many different ways. And I would say try to like use art as a tool to express yourself, than being like, oh, I don't know. I've heard a lot from my friends like, oh, I'm not good at painting. I'm not going to the art studio with you. I'm just gonna watch you. But then you just miss a chance to, really try to like manipulate with the materials and really try to like express yourself in that moment. But yeah. All right. The second question. I think we already went across this, so I'm going to ask the second and third together. The first one is, in your opinion, what is the value of enjoying art? And the third one is, how do your peers and people around you see art?
Yeah, I think we definitely touched on some of the value of art. And I think for me, I think one of the main things that we can bring away from art is expression of emotions, of feelings, and of ideas. And I think those are the very same expressions, feelings, and ideas that help shape the world and the culture we live in. And I think that's something that's so, so valuable, and something that if we really invest into this artwork that we're in, that we're that's going to shape all these sort of like political ideas and all these like social ideas. I think that's something that's really, really important, especially from like a younger audience for youth. I think that's one of the most important things we can do for our future generation. Yeah, I think most of the value comes from there. And once again, we've highlighted that there is lots of very crucial ideas that come across, and like lots of very important expressions, lots of different feelings. And I think it's really empowering to think that out there is someone else who feels just how you do, and there's proof of that. There's a painting, or there's a poem, or there's a song that it's like you can feel seen in a world that where it's kind of hard to feel seen. And I think a lot of people my age, there's not, most of the focus comes from like a very modern kind of perspective of art. Like I think we often neglect things like rap songs or like Instagram photos. Like we kind of neglect that that's also art, and that's also something that's really influential. And that's kind of one of the main, like these days, it's one of the main pieces that kind of influence and shape our world. And I think youth my age these days, they kind of view as, once again, an expression, but in kind of a different way. They see it as a way to kind of feel heard, but it may not necessarily be like classical art or, like songs like from the romantic period or anything like that. It's kind of a different thing, and I feel like that's often neglected a little bit, that is still art and that still serves the same purpose as like any other art. Yeah, and I think it's like these days, I think art is more common than we think. It's sort of everywhere, and I feel like we youth my age, we kind of don't see that it's everywhere, but it is still there and it's still affecting us. I think that's quite cool. I am quite artsy myself, so I surround myself with quite a few artsy people, and they'd say sort of the same thing, that very it's definitely one of the things that shapes the world we live in. And it's all very well to say that, like maths is very important and like all the STEM is really great, but without kind of the original mold, it's very that's sort of like where all those things fit in. So it's very much like compatible, and arts, like I think it's overlooked quite a bit as maybe not so academic, but it's still, I don't know, I feel like maybe a bit more recognition of what like art brings, and like seeing that it does shape the world and seeing that it is everywhere is something that's really important. And that's sort of my take on where what the value of art and sort of what my peers sort of think of it. Yeah.
Oh, so I think a lot of the values, I think what's valuable about art, I kind of mentioned in my answer to the previous question. So I'll just jump into the third question about other people's around me's perception of art. I think in general, it's a pretty unique, like it's very interesting, like thinking about it from like other perspectives, that if you're someone who's maybe not very engaged in the arts or thinks that you are an artist, because I think like what a lot of the common beliefs is you have to be talented in order to be an artist, like contrary to a lot of stuff about, I guess, STEM, like the popular belief for art is you have to be like blessed by the gods or by the muses. You have to have those like skills, you have to have this like intrinsic genius, the way you just see the world, you're able to manipulate the paint or anything like that. And like if you're good at art, then you're like, it kind of, even to a certain point, discounts the hard work you may have put in and the hours you have put in to get to that certain skill level, because people are just going to be like, you're good at this because you're gifted. Like you didn't have to work hard for it. It was just given to you and you're lucky. And I feel like that's just a false conception, and that's rooted in a lot of, I think, very interestingly, like ancient cultures, like beliefs surrounding art, and how in ancient Greece, it's the muses in which you didn't have the idea of the artwork or the art itself. They planted the idea in you. You're just an executor of like making it. And I think like that is one conception that kind of hinders people, like what Coco said, from trying out art if they're like a beginner, if they're a novice, and like not at a young age, when they're older and they already have these reservations towards art, as in I was just not born to do this, I'm just not good at it, like therefore it's not something I should spend my time doing or something like that. So I think that's a false concept, like a misconception that should be corrected. And kind of like, the threshold for good art should also be different. I feel like if you look at like what defines the value of art, like the market today for art, it is like taste that is supposedly obscure because it reflects highbrow culture, like this art should be valuable when it is aligned with the tastes of elites or like a smaller group of people in society that's more niche or anything like that. And I think that's also something worth thinking about, like changing the narrative of, like, why does stuff that is popular and liked by a majority of people or things that are like not super, like maybe obscure or abstract or like hard for general people who don't have the artistic lexicon vocabulary to talk about these things, why does it have to be so inaccessible? Why is that the way we define the value of artworks, to make it exclusive and to make it something that is demanded by the powerful or the intellectual elite? Um, I guess this is like getting very general here, but I think it all connects back to the topic of why people have reservations of art and why their beliefs of what art can do is limited by maybe um, what they've seen in the past and what they understand as like good art.
Mhm. I totally resonate with that. And I think that's where I guess the idea of art therapy comes into place, because art therapy, it's more than you do art, but you use art as a media to explore something in you. And I think that's how you can educate people to try to change their perception of art through when you're coming across the practice of art with the perception that you are using it to define yourself more than letting other people define how good you are at this certain talent or this certain skill set. I think it's quite important, as I think as Ansh said, there are a lot of forms of art, and I am sometimes, I was really ashamed that when I heard the same about like poetry, it didn't really came across my mind as a huge part of art. But then it's like I feel like you need to realize or acknowledge that all of those are forms of art, and all of those are space for self-expression, for emotion. And by knowing it, you can have better use of it. I think it will be quite interesting if people started to see Instagram post as a form of art. I think that can be a cool thing that could happen, and that will definitely change something in terms of how people behave with it, and how people change a part of their mindset on those stuffs. Yeah. So the next question is, the art is a very general term. We kind of like already came across how would you define art for yourself, but what are some possibilities and potentials you see in art and what they can do?
Yeah. So for the show that I've just finished with, there's this really, I think it's a really cute and empowering quote. It goes, "Give life's little guys some ink, and when it dries, just watch what happens." And so she's referring to these newsies who are striking for better rights. And she's a news reporter, and so she's trying to give them a bit of awareness. And like it's a very cute quote. But yeah, I think where I'm coming from with that is that bringing awareness about how impactful art can be, the values of art, how it can be for everyone, at a beginner level to an advanced level, and the value that art brings. I think once we bring awareness to it, and that can be done through like a variety of ways, social media, articles, events such as this one. I think once we let people talk it out in like in the social scene and come to the conclusion that art is actually amazing, we can start bringing out more opportunities for artists as a result. And with more opportunities, we can start to see benefits of things like art therapy, to come through, the benefits of having a medium to express yourself, the benefits of being able to be seen. And that's where the mental health aspect comes in. Once you feel seen, it's a little bit easier to kind of work through any issues you might have, and it's one way to kind of make a difference in your own life and in other people's lives too. And so where I'm coming from with it, I think it's really important to kind of for to make the most of art and to make the most of what art brings and through its healing I think one of the biggest possibilities, like to bring out the best possibilities. I think awareness is such an important aspect of that. And once we kind of make the most of that, and once we talk it out and realize that, you know, art is one of the most impactful ways to kind of shape the world we live in, I think there'll be a lot more like room for opportunities, a lot more art workshops, a lot more, you know, like singing competitions, a lot more like poetry workshops, more people writing poetry, so more books, or more people painting, so more art for people to feel seen. And from that, we can see all those benefits of art, of people feeling seen and people being able to express themselves. We'll see all those benefits that art therapy brings, and all that healing. And so that kind of comes from starting a conversation, which I think we've done quite effectively, like here, bringing in a youth panel to talk, and kind of identifying the issue, which is quite impactful. And I think doing that on like a larger scale, or doing that in your everyday life, I think, and kind of normalizing talking about art and talking about, you know, all the benefits that it brings. I think that's one of the best ways to bring out the best possibilities. And before we can kind of identify like what those possibilities are, it's I think it is valuable to kind of look at how to bring in those possibilities. That's sort of my take on that question. Yeah.
You.
I actually think that, again, we have covered a lot of the stuff related so far. But one thing I will add is, I think that like the definition of art is very interesting to think about. If you think about it, like for forms of writing, for instance, is there an art of writing a menu? Is there an art of writing an email? Is there an art of texting? Like all of these different forms of technically writing, I usually don't incorporate. It's like a school English curriculum. Are those art? Is it art? Is there art in it? Is there a craft in doing those things? And for visual stuff, more like kind of what Coco said, is the creation of a short video like TikTok. Is it film? Is it art? Is it like, what are these things? The world is constantly shifting, and things that we are making and doing and things changing. And I feel like it's interesting to ponder questions like that. And like, where do we draw the line? What is art and what is not art? So personally, I really don't have a good answer for that. It's just so hard. I think, you know, I definitely need to have more background. It's been like maybe philosophy to think about these big questions. But in my opinion, I think that what counts as art is always going to be a like an expanding circle or cat range, because in the past we've seen that what counts as art and good art, and then there's people like Marcel Duchamp who came around and put like a urinal in the MoMA, and the concept of like the ready-made. And I think it's just so interesting. And although there's a lot of critics of Duchamp for doing what he did, what he enabled was for future artists to like further expand on their creations and the mediums and materials they can work with, and the concepts of what art can be. So I like to think that it should be an expanding circle of art in our world today, but I don't really have a concrete answer to that, to be honest.
Thank you. Yeah, those are very thoughtful answers, and I think it's definitely important for people to recognize what forms are art, or just for people to be more accepted of what they consider as art. Because I mean, for me, what I see, our school have like a huge building only for art, ceramic studios, art studios, photography, but you know, like you can realize like not a lot of people use that. And sometimes it's frustrating to see that there's such a good chance of expression, there's such a good material you can use out there, but then not a lot of people are willing to really take that opportunity to, you know, to like really go inside the art studio. I definitely had, when I first came to this campus, I was like, oh my God, what if like they're like painting those like portraits and like oil painting? I'm like waiting there trying to make like stick figure comics, wouldn't they like laugh at me? But then I think there's definitely more like stigmatization on, or well, just like a not very inclusive definition of what can you do with art and what can you do with those materials you have, you know, especially for students. You have that art studio, what can you do with it? And that like it's a public infrastructure that everyone can use and try to like take advantage of it. So I think that's also a potential I see in art, is so for people to know that they're able to use it. And I feel like especially for schools to advocate for it, to tell everyone that like it's just as the gym, as like everyone can go to the gym, everyone can go to the art studio. And so yeah, we will jump a little bit to questions related to mental health. So I know for Ansh specifically, you have like a Leo club that's specifically focused on the communication of international mental health concept to youth in your school, but also just more generally, what inspire your awareness of mental health, especially for on campus for both Ansh and Catherine?
Yeah, for myself, it's definitely a club decision, but I kind of brought it to light in the club because looking around, we saw a lot of people struggling with poor mental health, a lot of students, a lot of our peers, and we realized that there is awareness, especially on social media, and it's quite great, but there's not a lot of it, and especially not coming from. I think it's one thing to see an Instagram post directed at the general public about taking care of your mental health, but it's another thing to hear it coming from voices within your school, from peers that you interact with daily. I think it is something that's a bit different. I think that comes up in a question later on, but yeah, there's not a lot of awareness, but and furthermore, there's not a lot done to give people guidance with what to do with all this awareness. Like, yes, you might have an understanding that I may have these issues or things I might struggle with, but what do I do with them? And so that's kind of where my club comes in. And one way we're working to affect that is we're making a mental health video for like the brand new school year, because we start school pretty soon, and so we're working on that in the first 2 weeks of school to get it done. And so I've worked with a couple of people in the club to come up with a script for that, and within that there's kind of like guideline, there's the awareness about what healthy mental health kind of like looks like, and then if that doesn't sound a bit like you, we have guidance for what you could do about it, if you feel like that's appropriate for you. And then one of the things is like directing them to the guidance counselors and talking about these issues. And then another would be something kind of like bringing in art, like ways to express yourself, and it kind of would range from like the smaller things you can do, like going on walks, or not so small things like going to see the guidance counselor or anything like that. And so it kind of just tied into one little video. And so that's one way my club and I are affecting, like we're trying to make an impact. And on the larger scale, it's not the biggest solution, but it is our solution, and it will make some impact within the school community, which I think is focusing on what we can do is quite, I think, a key part of making a change. But yeah, that's kind of what inspired a focus on mental health, and also I think the way we kind of came to the conclusion of mental health is also with the national Leo Zoom meetings. We have Zoom meetings for all the Leo clubs across New Zealand, and we kind of had a discussion about it. And one thing that came up in common, we were deciding on issues to focus on. One thing that came up in common was mental health. A lot of youth my age who are involved in clubs and involved like in activities outside of school, and I think that kind of says a bit about that person, is that they're, working to make change like outside of their school curriculum. A lot of people who fit in that sort of category feel like mental health isn't something that's talked about enough, especially for youth. And it's not something, and even if it is talked about, what do we do about, this issue? And I think that's something that's really important to talk about. But yeah, that's sort of where I'm coming from with a focus on mental health.
All right, thank you. Catherine, I know you have to go after 11, so do you want to just take this chance to, answer this question, express, some of your other thoughts on stuffs before you say goodbye to this wonderful workshop.
I can actually stay after for a little longer, but yeah, so what I was thinking of when hearing to all of you guys talk about this was like the really big problem of pluralistic ignorance. I've read something on social psych about this. I was like, oh wow, this is exactly what's happening in our school. And it's that like when a teacher asks a question in class and no one raises their hands because everyone thinks, I don't want to look like I don't want to get embarrassed in front of other people. They think that way because they think other people are not raising their hands because they know what's going on or they know the concepts that are being taught. But in truth, probably most of the people in the room didn't raise their hand because they're thinking the same thing as you. They think you know what's going on. They don't want to look embarrassed in front of you. And I think it's that just like when everyone presents a very curated version of themselves to the world, to the community, I'm fine, I'm doing well, I'm on top of my stuff, over excelling, overachieving, doing stuff in school, outside of school, managing my relationships. And I think when we try to present that version of ourselves that is like perfect and has it all and is a star student, is a good person, that's when, but when in truth, that's really not how we feel. And when everyone does that, it creates a culture where you feel like, I'm not going to be vulnerable because I feel so bad about myself because everyone else seems to be on top of other things. But in truth, everyone is scared of speaking out. Everyone's scared of showing vulnerability and showing that they're struggling because there's this culture, there's this unsaid kind of atmosphere hanging over everyone. And I think that's extremely toxic in communities for students that are like very rigorous places where there's a lot of demand, very demanding environments. So I feel like being a role model and coming out and speaking to your own struggles is actually really helpful for other people to realize that they're not alone. And that's something really, really important for them to feel, to get them to start speaking out and getting help and doing things to help themselves. So I think that's something that's really important in terms of like more concrete stuff that people can do to change the culture in their community. And I think the reason why art therapy is good, as I said before, relating to my point about being a Trojan horse, is they don't have to scream, I'm unwell, I need help. They can express it through what they create. And it doesn't have to be something that's the most explicit. They can take it at their own pace and try to kind of process these emotions in real time when they're creating, as well as communicating these ideas. And like if you look at a lot of literary publications, there's a lot of poetry and art that speaks to how students are feeling in the school. Like winter term, I think we get seasonal depression sometimes, our school body. Like there's a huge uptick in counseling. And you can see that in the publications compared to spring and fall. Like you can see it physically in the kind of emotions the poetry and the artwork convey and the vibe, just the vibe of what everyone makes. And I think that's like a good way to, when you read through that book, you realize people are struggling, that all the anonymous poetry submitted, all the anonymous works, the drawings, you understand that you're not alone. I think that's a really valuable thing to gain from this whole experience.
Yeah, thank you. Do you have to leave? I mean, feel free to log off whenever you have to leave, but I definitely resonate with that a lot. One thing I also I think we're gonna cover about it later, but then one thing I also observed a lot both on me and like my peers, my school environment, is how you see people complaining about burning out and anxiety on a daily basis, but then there's nothing else in a group base except for the counseling office that is actually implemented here to help people to deal with it. I have definitely a lot of like complaining to my friends like, oh, I'm so burnt out of the work last night, but what did I do after that? Basically nothing, because I didn't know. And I think it's also another mindset of the toxic kind of like mindset of like the more anxious you are, the more hardworking you are, the more achievements you get on a school basis. And there is this like little tweak of like how people take this as like a pride they have for like, you know, being in a high school student, and you're like, I am burned out, but I am hardworking. This is where I should be, and I don't need therapy, until, you know, when you came across this breaking point and you were like, oh no, like you're seeing those, like start to see those symptoms. And like I think it also came across on point of like there is a lack of awareness on what are some mental health issues. And you know, sometimes I feel like preventing it is more important than when you're like breaking apart and tearing up and your friends get you to the counseling office. So I think that's when our therapy can be a very powerful tool, especially a group-based one, that you don't phrase it as, oh, you need help, but you phrase it as, we are teaching you how to self-care, how to like put art, and how to put like relaxation techniques like art into your daily schedule. And I think that's why it's very important for you to put this kind of activity into school, because that way you teach the students that this should be a very valuable part of your life, and you should do that. You should get used to performing those routines so that you can relax, so that you can have this moment of self-expression, so that you know that mental health is a very priority of you, and you don't only do it so that you're like a hardworking student in your school, but you do it so that you know how to have the schedule of resting in you, even in the very future, when you're like, you know, doing work, when you're having like a job that's what you can always count on. So I think that's definitely one of the very big takeaway I got from, you know, like mental health, and especially on campus. Yeah. Our next topic, we are slightly very much running out of time, but I really want to briefly cover what you observed in youth and mental health, because I know a lot of us are like doing stuff specifically to youth. And I want to ask like why, and what do you think that is distinct from the general demographics in terms of the mental health issue?
Yeah. So I think there's a wide spectrum of reasons for a poor mental health, or if people struggling with mental health, and that ranges from things like burnout to anxiety and depression, and it all comes from different types of students as well. So people who work at different levels, academically, socially, or artistically, and like athletically, and all these different areas of interest. So I think identifying that there are different reasons people struggle is very key. And I think people may think, oh, I'm not anxious, so I guess I'm fine. But when in actuality that they have issues that are like kind of holding them back, making them feel not as happy, I guess. There's probably a better way to word that. But yeah, and I think maybe bringing better awareness of different types of issues could be quite impactful, bringing those for a wide spectrum of struggles into the mainstream. That is one way to make it quite impactful. And it doesn't necessarily have to be through a grueling infographic or, you know, a big research paper, but through art, which is another way to bring in more opportunities for art and more opportunities for youth. So through expression. And yeah, I keep tying it back to feeling seen. And I think that's the main thing that I found, is that there's not just one key struggle that everyone in youth is struggling with. And I think for me personally, I found that there's not like a distinct way to describe what I'm struggling with, or at least maybe I haven't looked hard enough. And it's not, you know, what has been talked about a lot about things like anxiety and depression, which are very, you know, key struggles and very like important to talk about. But then again, there's other things to talk about too. And I think maintaining the discussion around general mental health, and then bringing in all these other different angles as well, through things like, you know, organizations and bringing awareness, and, you know, through infographics as well. It would be nice to have some like reading material about that, but through art and through expression, I think that's something that's one way to kind of attack the issue of identifying that there's different struggles and different reasons to struggle and different ways to overcome it, and it's different for everyone. Yeah, I think that's something that I've observed in youth when it comes to mental health, and it's so different for every single person. It's really hard to put a finger on it. Yeah, and it comes from different types of students too. Yeah, that's my take on it.
Do you have any remarks?
I'll speak really quickly before I go. But I think the thing that's special about youth is actually a lot of times we can be much more unfiltered than adults. I've talked to like some of the school counselors about this, and they've also expressed this opinion that like I feel like we are braver little souls in terms of like speaking about ourselves. And I think whereas adults, there's a lot of burden to uphold someone, to present a facade even more than youths are, to be strong for someone else because you have a family or because you're old enough and you're not as attached to your parents anymore, you're independent. Whereas we're in this phase, we're still willing and open to talk about a lot of important things and have the conversations adults normally wouldn't have. I think that's something really valuable when you're working with youth and mental health, and something that like I truly appreciate, because being able to make the connections with other youth and seeing them speak about things like this is very inspiring and empowering. I think one of the other things is like we're also really susceptible to social pressures and peer pressure. And this is just the truth of, as we are growing, we're like more aware of these things during our adolescent phase. So I feel like if there's a communal shift, a shift in culture of a community, that can have impacts that will be stronger and more reverberating than compared to in the real world, like within a small community of youth or within a certain youth community. And that's why I think there's a lot of potential in this endeavors and products surrounding youth and mental health. Yeah.
I definitely resonate a lot with it. I feel like youth can be really powerful in speaking up and making changes in talking about your mental health. But then because we are also youth, and typically what we see in like students is that we lack the amount of freedom to really make changes on only yourself, when first of all when you think that you're only by yourself, and secondly, you know, those economic freedom, ability, and burden, is really hard for a single person to have the changes when you're in your school. It's just like one thing I realized, especially for boarding school, I can't be like, oh, I need to go out of campus, I need to see like an art therapist. So that's why I think it's very important that when we realize this topic is a very important and it's so frequently talked about in youth, that we can bring this art therapy, or we can bring the activities onto those campus. And I think together, when we resonate with each other, when like when you know, students are really like grouping together, it holds a stronger bond, and that's how we can really tackle a lot of issues. And it's also, I realized it from the talk with the NGO Art and Soul Therapy, they talk a lot about why they don't perform group therapies or like therapies that's only for anxiety, because of like the government policy. They think it's too light of a therapy, and because it's not like individual directly tackling a very, as Ansh said, like a specific mainstream mental problem, it is not as valuable. So they don't get as much funding or insurance funding from the government to perform those activities. And that's when I think kind of the problem comes from, and how it kind of basically, this whole policy issue excluded the whole like youth and student demographics from being able to seek for those form of mental support. Yeah, that's just a little bit of my thought of why this group is so different, and why like we are now doing something for ourselves in terms of, but not just like, oh, for everyone, because you need very specific action to tackle every kind of distinction. As you know, Catherine and Ash said, is the problem can be very big, but there are very different type, and I don't think anyone can ever feel the same on even the same mental health issue. So that's when I think it's just very important for you to really focus down on what we need to do. Yeah. I think it's our final discussion topic, because we're like tackling SDG 3 and 4 and 17. What roles do you think are the youth taking nowadays as game changers? And whether do you think there are any like constraints that are holding our impact back?
Yeah, I gotta go right now, so I just want to
Okay, bye.
bye to everyone. Thank you guys for having me.
Nice meeting you. I think I have a kind of like a perspective on this because I worked with a lot of children on with school directing project. And I think one of the main things with that is that we often overlook people's ability, and especially young people. They're capable of a lot more than we think. I think we underestimate them a lot. And one way that I did this was in my first ever musical directing, I was like, oh, I'm going to have to really dumb down these harmonies. And then I ended up just trying to teach it to them just how it was written. And they just did it. And I wasn't expecting it to be that simple for them, but it was, because I was working with quite a young kind of range, so that's like 10 to 11. And they did it so well. And it just reminded me, it like really humbled me, because I was like, wow, people are capable of so much more than you give them credit for. And if you just give them those opportunities, they'll make the most of them, or at least you hope they make the most of them. And I think without them, we're suffocating our future generation's potential. And it comes with, I think it comes from creating hubs for creativity in our small communities, and then branching out and then securing opportunities internationally. And it kind of ties in this question. I think the way like a lot of youth are taking action nowadays, I think it's been quite evident in this panel, with Art for Healing, the Art for Healing project, and with Catherine's project. I think it's quite evident that there are youth taking action. And I think the one constraint that there is just we are underestimating our youth. And I think to break that, I think we need to really bring light to the phrase ability over age, and really kind of drive that home, that it comes down to what people are capable of and not overlooking them because of their age. And I think that's something that's very common. And I think there's also it's important to acknowledge that there's a lot of action being done to kind of bring that to light. And there's lots of opportunities that are being created for youth, and compared to say 10 years ago. But I think it's important to keep that change up, keep that change growing and going, while still acknowledging that there has been a change. So it is a kind of like a tricky, nuanced thing to look at, but it's there. And I think there's definitely lots of people taking action, and we've seen in this panel, and there's going to be people all over the world that are taking action. And I think normalizing taking action and kind of promoting and inspiring people to take action, alongside the ones that already have taken action, and then kind of tying it in with the narrative that you can do things even if you are young, ability over age. I think it's kind of like a way to tie all these different ideas together to promote quality education. Yeah.
I definitely feel that and agree with that. And I think it's just so important. The quote ability over age is it's such a good quote. And I think that's also, you mentioned there are a lot more actions that's being done for youth to be seen and to be trusted or credited for the things they have and the ideas they have. Take, for example, the panel we're on right now, the festival we're on right now. I think it's all like very wonderful youth empowerment. And I feel like especially it's because we are kind of like considered as, Gen Z, the future generation. A lot of the problems we are seeing right now can be the perspective, the angle can be really different from, if we compare with adults. And I think it's especially very interesting when we were talking about like mental health. We are seeing the issue among ourselves. And I feel like it's also why you are doing that high school club on mental health, we are seeing that issue. So when we present it to our peers, it's always more credible, more relatable, and it's always a better way to do and to deal with those issues. Like the applications are always like more relevant to our peers, and I think the actions can be also more powerful. Yeah, I think nowadays you just need to give more credit towards people who are actually doing it. And it's similar to mental health. If you can't see people speaking up for it, it's very hard for other people, even with the right idea, to have any actions on it, and especially youth. We need to definitely encourage more actions and more ideas that's actually being taken implementation on in, I think, the society right now. So yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I definitely agree on the thing with like perspective. And I really like the way you put it. It's so much more credible when it's your peer is saying or your friend is telling you this instead of I don't instead of like this anonymous voice, which like just the media is just like kind of anonymous and it kind of comes at you from nowhere, and you don't really feel like it doesn't hit you like how it does if you hear it from someone your age saying it, and it's so much more credible. That's a really nice way of putting it. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Ansh and Catherine, who is gone for this youth panel. That will wrap up our final question. And yeah, thank you so much. Those are really thoughtful answers, and I really love hearing all of those experience and life stories. I think it's also a really important part for youth empowerment and also mental health. You need to express it, and I think what we're doing is for the people to really hear those and find synergies in thoughts, I guess.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me.
I will. Okay, let's go to our next panel. I will invite you. All right. So, now as highlighted by Learning Planet Festival Day 5, we as Planetisms need to take the stage. We are proudly launching the Shield Initiative in Learning Planet Festival 2023 as our final step. And along with SDG number 17, the Shield Initiative calls for partnerships for the goals. Our next key steps include first, the youth. We call for youth involvement to empower more individuals. SHIELD wants to encourage more youth from diverse schools, countries, and backgrounds to initiate art therapy in their own campus. And second, the NGOs. SHIELD want to cooperate with more NGOs who share the same goals to make professional art therapy possible. And lastly, the schools. With that being said, we need school participations to provide space and support for art therapy and for our teens. So join on our website through email, text, and questionnaire if we want to work together to achieve our next steps together. In SHIELD, we not only help youth, but we are the youth who are taking actions to shape a difference of what the future could look like for us. We want more youth to hear our stories, share their stories, and bring SHIELD to their campuses and peers that they care. So thank you for attending this workshop, and we hope this may be inspiring more awareness and initiatives on mental wellness. Engage with SHIELD initiative by scanning the QR code and bring SHIELD to your school. And as final words, big thanks to UNESCO and Learning Planet Institute team for Learning Planet Festival 2023. All right, thank you. Okay, perfect.
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Thank you.